Everybody always asks, what or who is Jason Voorhees? But nobody ever asks, how is Jason Voorhees? I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. But some people have asked us, how is Factor 75? And you know what we tell them? It's amazing. It's so good. If you've been following along with the channel for a little while, you probably know that we love working with Factor. They are one of the best partnerships we've had. This all started off with them sending us a free box to sample, to do the first ad, and we both immediately signed up. We've been getting a box each week ever since. I love it, my girlfriend loves it, Aiden loves it, Aiden's girlfriend probably loves it. I haven't asked her, but...
As far as I know.
Yeah, see, it saves us all so much time when it comes to cooking. It's nice to have a reliably good meal that if you're feeling lazy or you're on the go, you're in a rush, you can just go into the fridge, grab something, and you know it's not going to taste like a microwavable dinner. It's going to taste like something that you just ordered at a restaurant. They have at least 34 menu items at any given time. They've got a range of options from keto, protein-packed, calorie smart. It's... It's really just, you never get bored. It's awesome. And one thing that's really nice about it is it's very easy if I'm going to be out of town for a week because we're traveling to do a shoot somewhere, or I'm, going on vacation with my family, I can just hit pause on the deliveries and I don't have to worry about it. I don't get charged for anything. They don't penalize you for skipping a week. It's just boom, great. Obviously, I can't say enough good things. We have loved working with them. I cannot recommend Factor highly enough. If you want to try them yourself, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code LORELODGE50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. And to be perfectly honest, I needed Factor this week because there are so many Friday the 13th movies. If you grew up anywhere in the Western cultural sphere, you're probably familiar with the idea of Friday the 13th being a bad omen, a day of bad luck, a bad day to set sail, any number of things, but just a general vibe that Friday the 13th, not a good day. Now, of course, we got the opportunity to have a Friday the 13th in October, and we thought, oh, we cannot pass that opportunity up. But then we had to do a video on both Friday the 13th, the film series, and Friday the 13th, the Superstition, and we just decided to do them at the same time. As far as Friday the 13th, the film series, the title refers to the birthday of the primary antagonist, Jason Voorhees. However, according to the filmmakers, there's also a underlying theme throughout the series of bad luck, and that refers back to Friday the 13th. You can watch the movies yourself and decide if you think that they actually planned that far ahead, but, I'm getting ahead of myself. But even if you have grown up with the idea that Friday the 13th is this bad day, you might not know why. And that's not your fault, that's not your parents' fault, that's because nobody's really quite sure where the superstition comes from. Of course, there is at least one Friday the 13th every year, and there can be up to 3 in a given year, so why is something that is so common, that occurs literally every year, why is that weird? Why is that something we should be worried about? If you ask a lot of people today, they might say that it's because of the Knights Templar, who were arrested on Friday the 13th of October, 1307 AD. And that's largely because Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, and the success of the film that followed it, gave people this impression, despite the fact that that's really not true. There's no evidence that that's the case. The Templars were arrested on the 13th of October, 1307 AD, but the two don't connect. It could be because in both European and American folklore, depending on the country, you can see a theme of both Friday and 13 being unlucky, and it may be that they were unlucky themselves, independent of one another, and this is a situation where people were like, oh no, not the two at the same time. Friday being an unlucky day, according to Wikipedia, goes back to the 14th century. Wikipedia is wrong. The attribution here is Chaucer and his Canterbury Tales, and the allegation here is that he wrote on a couple of occasions that Friday the 13th was unlucky, that unlucky things happened on Fridays. It's true, he did write about unlucky things that happened on Fridays. What he's mainly saying in his stories is that it's ironic that something bad happened on a Friday, not that Friday causes bad things to happen. And there's a lot of stuff that has to do with Venus in there, it's a whole thing. So far as I was able to tell, there's no clear origin for Friday being unlucky. It just sort of developed over time. The 13 aspect of it has some more concrete possibilities, just that number itself being unlucky, not a date. Though the thing is, most of the best options here date to very recent centuries. As I said, while the Knights Templar were arrested on Friday the 13th of October 1307 AD, there's no connection with the modern superstition that can be proven. And for the record, all of the allegations against the Templars, their heresies, they were actually absolved of them by the Pope, and there's a lot of evidence that the reason the whole thing happened in the first place is because King Philip IV of France owed the Templars a lot of money and did not have the funds to pay them back. Another popular origin story has to do with Norse folklore and the death of the god Balder. It's said that there were 12 gods present at this dinner, and then Loki showed up, the 13th god. Loki was bearing kind of an ill omen here because he decided that he was going to get Balder killed. There's a story we could tell there. Basically, Balder cannot be killed by anything but mistletoe because the mistletoe was too young to pledge not to kill Balder. And then Loki found this out, and Loki made a spear of mistletoe, gave it to his blind cousin, I believe it would be, Hod, and then said, hey, throw this at Balder, because they thought it was fun to throw things at Balder because he couldn't die. So Hod throws it, and it spears Balder, and because it's made of mistletoe, it actually kills him, and everybody's like, oh no, Balder's dead, he was so pretty, don't die, you were so sexy, ah ha ha ha, and then the guy gets his hand bitten off by a wolf, and the whole world catches on fire, and then floods. It's a whole thing. Now, that whole story does in fact come from Norse mythology, but the thing is, I couldn't find an example where it was definitive that there were only 12 gods there before Loki showed up. There are supposed to be 12 chief gods in the Norse pantheon, and there's 12 abodes for them, and 12 thrones. 12 is just an important number in the Norse mythology, but it's also possible that that's because of the Christian influence. The guy who was writing all of this down in the Prose Edda, Snorri Sturluson, he was a Christian writer, and it's possible that some of the numerology came from Christianity, not the Norse. It's also possible it's original to the Norse, it's just hard to say. Either way, though, it wasn't clear to me that there were only 12 gods present there from the prose or poetic Eddas. So on that account, the idea that this is the origin story also seems a little flimsy. Keeping on the religion track, there's a possibility that it was associated with early Christianity, and the fact that Judas was the 13th man at the table, that he was the one who betrayed Jesus, that this was prophesied at the Last Supper, and that 13 is an unlucky number to dine with as a result, and that's where the 13 superstition comes from. The thing is, 13 being unlucky does not seem to have been observed by early Christians. Many early Christians were raised in the Jewish tradition, which meant that 13 was the age of adulthood for them. Catholics, on the other hand, have associated multiple saints with the number, and it is the summation of two important numbers from Christianity, 10 and 3. And then there's another theory that describes European pagan origin, but that's specifically with Wicca. And this is because in certain Wiccan circles, 13 is viewed as the ideal number of witches for a coven. If Wicca were the origin, however, that would mean that this superstition has only been around since about 1954, and we have references going back into the 19th century. I went to look at usage of the term Friday the 13th over time, and it does start to rise back in about the 16th, 17th century, and then it really picks up in the 19th. But the thing is, it's also a date, and that's when we started writing things down a lot more, as people became more literate and more history was written. So it's hard to say, is Friday the 13th showing up because it's a superstition, it's something that's common knowledge, or is Friday the 13th showing up because people are simply writing about more things that happened on Friday the 13th? What we can say for certain is that the superstition was widespread enough to be used as the primary plot device in T.W. Lawson's novel Friday the 13th in 1907. Of course, in that novel, the antagonist is not a masked killer named Jason Voorhees. It's more man versus self, but that's not the point. The point is, however the Friday the 13th superstition got started, it seems to have really picked up steam in the 19th and 20th centuries. But you may be asking, what does that have to do with Jason Voorhees, and what is even Jason Voorhees?
Daddy, chill. What the hell is even that?
There were initially 4 films in the Friday the 13th series: Friday the 13th, Part 2, Part 3, and the final chapter. All 4 follow one continuous storyline centered on hero Jason Voorhees, who gets rid of pesky tourists at his campground. If you hate teenagers, this is the movie for you. Now, there are in total 12 Friday the 13th films, but you know what, they go off the rails, so we decided to stick with the original 4. Once he goes to hell and becomes RoboCop, I was kinda done. But because I couldn't let you sit here wondering what those 12 films are, there's of course the actual Friday the 13th series, all of the movies that are Friday the 13th specific and not kind of offshoot Jason Voorhees, and those include those first 4, and then we've got A New Beginning, Jason Lives, The New Blood, and Jason Takes Manhattan. The additional movies not directly following the story set up in the 80s include Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, Jason X, Freddy vs. Jason, and the 2000 remake Friday the 13th. The 2009 one is actually a solid horror movie. I would recommend it. But like I said, for the sake of my sanity, we're focusing on the first 4. Of course, there are spoilers ahead, but the most recent film in the series came out 14 years ago, so you had time. The first film in this masterpiece of cinema introduces us to Camp Crystal Lake in 1958. And by the way, Camp Crystal Lake is in the second worst state in America, New Jersey. I kid to my New Jersey brothers across the border. You guys we like your beaches. You guys have nice beaches. Learn to pump your own gas, though. Please. It's so inconvenient that I have to let some other guy pump my gas. Like, I feel cucked by that.
Just trust me, man. God.
We see this nice little scene where there's a fire and some counselors and campers singing little campfire songs inside, and then 2 counselors go off to hold hands in an empty cabin. But what they didn't count on was a 3rd pair of hands. An unseen scoundrel relieves them of the burden of existence by stabbing one through the gut, and then the screen just fades to black as the other one screams. However, they do seem to recognize the killer. The story resumes in 1979 or 1980, I'm not entirely sure because it says present day, but the movie was shot in 79 and came out in 80. Anyway, she's hitchhiking on her way to be a cook at a summer camp, which is just a series of words that would not apply to anybody today. Now, what camp is she on her way to? Well, Camp Crystal Lake, of course. As she passes through, she stops at a cafe or a diner, and she asks how to get there, and the locals just kind of generally warn her, oh, that place, don't go there. And the stories here vary from, it's just creepy up there after what happened, to it's got a death curse. But one of them does agree to give Annie a ride, at least part of the way to the camp, and on the drive over explains that there was a series of unfortunate events back in 1957 through 1962. In 57, because the counselors weren't paying attention, a young boy drowned in the lake. In 58, 2 counselors were murdered. And then in 1962, when they went to open up the camp, the water was bad. What that means is not made clear. It's never said explicitly where in New Jersey this camp is, but the filming location was a Boy Scout camp, Nobi Bosco, and that is on Sand Pond in Hardwick Township, New Jersey. So the region we're looking at here is kind of Appalachian foothills. While Annie is making her way to camp, the rest of the counselors are actually arriving, and they realize that there's some work to be done before the camp can actually open for campers the next week. Ned, Jack, Bill, Marcy, and Brenda will be working as counselors under owner Steve Christie and his girlfriend Alice for the foreseeable future, for this summer. The situation with Steve Christie and Alice, it's not ever made super clear, but it seems like she started working for him as a counselor and then the relationship developed after that. Make of that what you will. After telling everybody what their exact responsibilities will be for the day, Steve says he's got to go into town and get some stuff, remarks that it's about to storm, and drives off with the top of his Jeep down, which is not what you're supposed to do. The rest of the counselors return to duty, and meanwhile, Annie is picked up by a Jeep that is the same color as Steve's Jeep, but has the top up. And in this case, the driver is unseen. Annie talks to the driver, but the driver doesn't talk back, and the camera is, from the driver's perspective. So we know something's a little shady here. Now, if you're wondering if there's a specific meaning, a symbolism to the 2 Jeeps, is this telling us that these 2 are the same person? No, that is not what's being implied. What's being implied is that they could only afford 1 Jeep, so they only shot with 1 Jeep. And I'm really not spoiling anything that I'm going to get to later in the video here, because within the same scene, The driver takes Annie right past the turnoff for Crystal Lake. She realizes something's off, asks to be dropped off, opens the door, jumps out, and then runs through the woods. Whoever the driver is catches up with her and gives her a little slicey slice across the throat, which, unfortunately, is something that she does not survive. A little while later, our buddy Ned, back at the camp, is feeling spurned by Marcy as she frolics about with Jack. And as he walks around trying to distract himself, he thinks he sees somebody walk into a cabin. He follows the person in, and not long after, a storm rolls in. Because of the storm, Marcy and Jack go into the same cabin to study anatomy together. After that, Marcy decides that she's going to go to the bathroom and walks off, because she's got to go find the restroom, because we're at a camp here, so there's an outdoor, whole building for that. While she's gone, Jack feels a drop of liquid fall down and realizes that it's blood, and that Ned's lifeless body was in fact on the top bunk the whole time. Before he even has time to say, "Not cool, bro," an arrow pierces his heart from beneath the mattress. Marcy, of course, is in the restroom for all of this, and the killer then follows her in, and we get a very Tarantino-esque shot of Marcy's feet for some reason. Marcy then ends up on the business end of an axe after hearing someone enter the bathroom and assuming it was Jack. It was not Jack. Back inside the main cabin, the remaining counselors are playing a very saucy game of Strip Monopoly. I'm not sure why, but Strip Monopoly sounds considerably more exploitative than other forms of strip board games. Oh, you don't have any money to pay rent, do you? Before I tell you the next part of this, I should probably make clear that the storm started sometime in the early afternoon. It is now dark out, and Brenda just now realizes that she left the windows in her cabin open. At this point, she decides it is imperative that she run off and shut them as if the damage wasn't already done, and says goodnight to the other two, which of course clues us in that they won't be looking for her till morning. This leaves Bill and Alice alone in the cabin together. Brenda, of course, stops by the bathroom, and while she's in there, she feels like she's being watched from one of the showers, but in something that is stunningly uncommon for horror movies, she does not decide to go check it out alone. So she just leaves. Meanwhile, Steve is back in town, and he's settling up at the diner, and of course he had told everybody he was going to be back a little bit after noon, and it's now dark because he decided he was going to try and wait out the storm, but the storm simply isn't ending, and he needs to get back, so he gets in the car and heads home. Unfortunately for Steve, his car dies, and he has to catch a ride back with a police officer. We go back to camp, where Brenda is reading in her cabin when she hears a young boy's voice calling out for help, or at least a young child. And she decides, you know what, I'm gonna go check that out, and she runs off following the voice, and it takes her to the archery range, and once they get there, the floodlights turn on. We don't see what happens, but she screams. Alice and Bill hear that scream and go to check it out, and while looking around, they find a bloody axe in Brenda's bed. They go to check the other cabins, and nobody is home. They go to the office to call for help, but the phone lines have been cut. They go to the car to start that and escape that way, but the spark plug isn't working. So, out of options, they decide that they're just gonna wait for Steve, because he should be back soon. Steve, of course, is in the police car at this point, and he and the officer are talking about how, it's Friday the 13th, and it's a full moon. This, by the way, is the first time in the film that it has been mentioned that it is Friday the 13th, or that the words Friday the 13th have been uttered by a single character. Anyway, since it's both Friday the 13th and a full moon, that means it's double trouble. People are just acting all sorts of crazy. Steve kind of, shrugs it off, but as if conjuring a problem, the cop gets a call and he has to go to a scene, so he has to just drop Steve on the side of the road. Thankfully, by this point, the rain has let up, so it's not a huge issue, and Steve just starts heading back. And then, as he approaches the sign for the camp at the turnoff, he sees somebody that he recognizes and says, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" His friendliness is not reciprocated, and he is simply yoinked. I say yoinked because the exact method of dispatch is not shown. He just simply cuts, and then we see that the camp's lighting system just turns off as we hear a generator turn off. And they had turned on the generator after the power was initially knocked out by the storm. This was a rather short and forgettable scene that I didn't even realize happened. Bill goes to check on it, but he doesn't come back, so Alice goes to find him, and finds him pinned to a door looking like Boromir at the end of Fellowship. Pulled an Edmund the Martyr on this man. One fun little fact here, though, is that the actress Adrienne King, who was playing Alice, had not seen the body yet, and it wasn't a body, it was the actual actor for Bill, who just had makeup on. So she hadn't seen this, what had been done to him, until they shot the scene. and the reaction she had is genuine. Also, if you watch, Bill's eye is twitching throughout it, and it's because some of, I think it was the adhesive from all of the makeup and everything had gotten into his eye, and it was actually like burning him and causing him excruciating pain. Alice screams, runs away, barricades herself inside of a cabin, and then Brenda's body just gets thrown through the window. As you can imagine, this is met with more screaming, and then a Jeep pulls up outside. Alice runs outside and encounters a woman who identifies herself as Mrs. Voorhees, an old friend of the Christies. Mrs. Voorhees is remarkably unconcerned about all of the dead bodies and the situation at hand, and very dramatically laments how unfortunate all of this is, and then starts telling the story of how a boy drowned at that camp in 1957. She blames the counselors who were tragically off holding hands, and that it was her son, in fact, that drowned, and that today, Friday the 13th, is his birthday. Alice senses something is off here and says that she wants to stay and wait for Mr. Christie, but Pamela Voorhees has clearly snapped because she's not even looking at Alice at this point. She's looking off into the sky, hearing her son's voice calling out to her. Mrs. Voorhees tries to kill Alice, and Alice runs away, and this leads to a series of fights and chases where Alice stumbles across more and more bodies and is more and more frightened. Finally, they meet on the shore of the lake where Alice beheads Mrs. Voorhees before getting into a canoe and just setting herself off into the lake. In the morning, she wakes up in the canoe to find police on the shore waving at her and feels a sense of relief until suddenly she is pulled beneath the waves by a rather deformed-looking little boy covered in pond scum. She wakes up in a hospital bed and learns that the whole incident with the boy was just kind of a dream for her trauma manifesting, and that all of the others are dead. She asks, what about the boy? Like, did you find the boy? And the police say, we didn't find a boy. And then she ominously looks off into the camera, or not into the camera, but, off into the distance and goes, then he's still out there. Now, the first Friday the 13th film, much like the first Star Wars, was not intended to launch a franchise. But the thing is, on a $550,000 budget, it made $59.8 million. The only Paramount Pictures film released that year to outsell Friday the 13th was the comedy hit Airplane. Unlike Star Wars, however, there was no natural way to continue from where the first film left off. So some on-the-fly changes had to be made here, and one of the most important was regarding who the villain was going to be, and that required changing Jason's story. Friday the 13th Part 2 opens 2 months after the events of the first movie. Alice is recovering from her ordeal when she gets a phone call with nobody on the other end.
The phone will ring, and there will be nobody there.
This spooks her a little bit, so she goes to lock up her apartment and finds that, there is a window left open. She gets very nervous and approaches it and goes to close it, and a cat jumps in, and she's like, ah ha ha, it's just a kitty cat. She closes the window, she goes to open the fridge to get a snacky snack, and oh no, it's Pamela Voorhees' severed head. Realizing somebody must have eaten her spare lo mein and replaced it with this head, she screams in horror. And then, as she screams, she receives a rather amateur and rushed ice pick lobotomy. From this point on, the movie is very similar to the original. This time it centers on a school for camp counselors, yes really, on the shores of Crystal Lake, but in a different part of the lake. 5 years later. The character lineup here really does feel like somebody copied the homework and tried not to make it look like it was the same thing, but the counselors in training here are Sandra, Jeff, Scott, Terry, Mark, Vicky, and Ted, and the camp is run by Paul and his girlfriend Ginny. As you can see, this is a very, very unique movie that is in no way just copying the storyline of the first. Like, I don't know, say a Star Wars film that, followed a tragic orphan hero from a desert planet as they got some rapscallion friends around the galaxy and went to destroy a large Death Star battle station thing, that took out something that was some sort of New Republic base. Kind of like that. I do wonder if Disney will ever make use of Star Wars and make sequels. Anyway, that first night, they sit around the campfire, and Paul does what any good camp counselor does. He tells a scary story. One of my favorite things to happen recently was that I was on a camping trip with friends, and they were like, Aiden, you're you're the YouTube scary story guy. Tell us a scary story. And then I did, and they all actually got scared. And if you've got a story as good as crazed murderer terrorizes camp at this very lake, that's of course the story you tell. He tells them that after Jason died as a young boy, his body was never actually discovered. And some locals believe that ever since, he's been wandering the woods as this demented creature. And he adds that Alice, the girl that survived that killing spree 5 years earlier, that she claimed to have seen him. And then he mentions she vanished, leaving blood everywhere, and nobody knows what happened. So they should be aware that Jason is still out there, and he will kill anybody to avenge his mother. As he finishes the story with everybody, clearly terrified, Ted jumps out with a spear, dressed in rags and having a mask on and screaming, and everybody panics and runs away, and it's all revealed that, come on guys, it's all a legend, we're just joking around, don't worry about it. Jason's dead, Pamela Voorhees is dead, nothing to worry about. Also, one thing you will pick up on, a lot of names, specifically the name Ted, get reused a lot in this series. These are not the same characters. They are all different characters who they just didn't bother to give new names. The 2009 remake, all of them have different names from the originals. It was that easy. Also, just one weird little thing here about the movie is there are at least 14 counselors shown. Only 9 of them are actually named, and 5 of them just aren't shown ever again after one scene, and it's never explained what happened to them, and they're not listed among the death count, nor are they explained as survivors. They just disappear. Like, it's not a lore thing, it's a filmmaking thing, which you could say foreshadows everything about this series. The very next day, Sandra and Jeff decide that they're gonna go off for a walk because they want to go see Camp Crystal Lake. Now, of course, they were told that Camp Crystal Lake, also known as Camp Blood, is off limits. And while exploring, they come across Terry's dog, which had run away. Terry's dog is unfortunately no longer with us. They're caught by a Deputy Wilson, who gives them a lecture back at the cabin, and then also gives Paul a lecture about how maybe he'll put a warrant out for him, and he really should relocate the next county over. There's just too much history there, and people want this to stay buried. On his way back to the station or to his patrol, wherever he's going, he sees a masked man running through the woods, and he decides to give chase. It's kind of a comically long chase scene given how out of shape the deputy is, but he gets to a cabin, and as he walks in, you can see that Jason is in the woods behind him. I mean, I shouldn't spoil that it's Jason, but it's obviously Jason. Come on, guys. Anyway, he chases him through, and you see that Deputy Wilson goes inside the cabin, and he sees something that shocks him. And then you see 2 feet step in behind him. The killer says, "Stop, hammer time," and Deputy Wilson unfortunately does stop because it very much is hammer time. That was the wrong song. We both did the wrong song there. That was Can't Touch This.
Yeah, I was wondering why it sounded a little...
Later that night, because nobody knows what happened to Deputy Wilson, Paul gives everybody, one night, you can have one last night out on the town before we take this really seriously for some reason. Like, it's summer camp counseling, guys. It's like they've got shore leave from camp counselor school. Jeff, Sandra, Mark, Vicky, Terry, and Scott all decide to stay behind. Well, Jeff and Sandra are told they have to stay behind because they're being punished for their little Crystal Lake thingy. But the others, they just don't want to go. As with the previous movies, all of the real trouble starts when everybody starts to split off into groups. Jeff and Sandra go upstairs to do the horizontal tango, Mark and Vicky stay downstairs to play video games, Terry decides this is a great time to go skinny dipping, and Scott decides that this is a great time to follow Terry. Terry gets out of the water to find that Scott has taken her clothes, and while she chases him around trying to get them back, he gets caught by a snare, and it pulls him upside down, and he's just hanging out there. Terry gathers her clothes and goes to find a knife to cut him down, and while she's gone, somebody comes by with a machete and slits Scott's throat. Meanwhile, at the bar, Ginny wonders what Jason is, if he's real. She rattles off some options, including a boy beast, out-of-control psychopath, a child trapped in a man's body, and one other option that didn't age so well and I don't think would play well with YouTube's community guidelines. She suggests that maybe his mother was the only person he'd ever known, and he had loved her so much, and she had been the only person to ever love him, and he had to watch her die at the hands of this cruel camp counselor who was literally just trying to defend herself. But anyway, Jason doesn't know that. He might not even grasp the meaning of death. And all of this, everything she did only because she loved him. And so now he must still be out there crying, waiting for her return. Now, of course, all of this is a filmmaking device, because this is precisely what happened, and we are being told this right now. And the point here is to explain to the audience, who presumably saw the first film, how the second film is happening, how this has materialized. So in this case, this isn't Mrs. Voorhees again. She's not back from the dead. This is Jason himself, who has grown up alone in the forest for over 20 years, and he has gone completely insane as a result. This is a minor retcon, because of course the idea that Jason had never known another person besides his mother can't be true. The first movie shows that he was with other people, that he knew the other children at the camp, the counselors, all of that. Now it could be, if you look at it, Ginny is just kind of conjecturing here. So it could be that that's not supposed to be the actual exactly what happened situation, but it is kind of the only information we're given. There's no real explanation for how he survived drowning to, like, adulthood, but the rest of it can make sense. Back at camp, Vicky and Mark decide that they're gonna go find a cabin to have some alone time, and Vicky is like, okay, let me go get some things. She needs to freshen up, get a change of clothes, all of that. So she runs off to her cabin, and while she's out, it begins to storm. Mark rolls his wheelchair out onto the porch to look for her, and while he's kind of gazing off into the distance, for an odd period of time, given the fact that he really sees nothing, he's just kind of staring in one direction, like, for a while. Anyway, while he does that, Jason decides to test the effectiveness of his new machete sharpener with Mark's face. His review, it was worth every penny. Mark then rolls backward down just so many stairs. Like so many stairs. Jason then heads inside to find Sandra and Jeff not leaving any room for Jesus, and uses the very same spear used by Ted and Paul for their prank to give them the shaft. Vicky heads inside looking for Mark, but finds Jason in Sandra's bed, and Mark's just hanging out on the wall, and I mean that literally. Sorry, not Mark, it's Jeff that's hanging out on the wall. Jason slices Vicky's leg and then does something very mean to her with a knife. Paul and Ginny then return to camp and find no campers, no lights, and lots of blood, which is never a good sign. And then while they're trying to decide what to do next, Ginny goes, "Paul, there's someone in the room." And then she says it again, but much louder and more frantically. And Paul, at this point, decides that, you know what, maybe 2 screams is enough. Turns around and Jason tries to harpoon him or spear him with something. Paul deftly steps out of the way, and they go to fisticuffs. They end up grappling on the ground, and after a while, Paul does not get back up, while Jason does. Now, of course, the entire time, Paul had been saying, "Ginny, go," and Ginny had just been standing there, neither helping nor going, and then finally, after Paul was no longer able to help buy her time, and Jason was staring at her, then she decides to run. Common theme of these films is that if anyone behaved with even the slightest degree of rationality, nothing would go wrong. And now I'm realizing I had kind of forgotten to introduce a character earlier in the episode. There's this crazy guy named Ralph who talks about how there's a killer up in the woods and how anybody who goes up there is going to die because the area is cursed. Now, Ralph is definitely crazy, but he's also right. Anyway, he was in the first movie and the second, and earlier in the evening, he got he got a barbed wire necklace, and now he's in the pantry, and Ginny opens the pantry and he falls out, so sorry. Ginny runs away and hides in a cabin, but Jason chases her. She fends him off with a chainsaw and then smashes a chair over his back. She runs into the woods, she stumbles across a shack. It's Jason's shack, and he's right there. She hides inside, where she finds Mrs. Voorhees' mummified head, as well as a couple of bodies that are Jason's grisly little trophies. Also, Mrs. Voorhees' head is like on a shrine with her sweater laid out in front of it. So thinking quickly, she puts on the sweater, turns around, and starts speaking to Jason, telling him that she's his mother, and he did good, and he can rest now. And Jason starts to believe it, because clearly he's not all there. So he starts to believe it, and Ginny gets ready to take a knife to him, and then she steps out of the way, and he sees the head behind her, realizes and goes to attack, and at the very last moment, Paul bursts into the room. Paul holds Jason off long enough for Ginny to bury a machete in Jason's clavicle, and he just kind of keels over to the side. It goes down to about, like, here. It's deep. Ginny and Paul return to the cabins, a little worried that Jason is still following them, get ready to barricade themselves inside. They hear something at the door, they open it, ready for the worst, but it's just a dog. And then Ginny is sitting on the bed when Jason bursts through the window behind her, grabs her in a big bear hug, and yanks her out the window with him. And at this point, it shows us his maskless and horrifically deformed face. Ginny wakes up with an EMT taking her away in an ambulance, and Paul nowhere to be seen. We also see the shrine where Ginny chopped Jason, and Jason is also nowhere to be seen. So in this installment, we're introduced to Jason as a killer, and we learn some things about him. He somehow survived the drowning, managed to survive in the woods for years unbeknownst to his mother, and then she went insane and killed a bunch of people to avenge him, and then she met her end at Alex's machete right before his eyes. Does it really make sense? No. Is it totally impossible? No. We also learn that he has an extraordinary pain tolerance, and he can't stop himself from killing, but he can patiently plan out his kills. He also does take trophies, but there's no evidence yet that he violates them or eats them. Finally, he is huge, very strong, and seems to be able to recover from crippling injuries in a matter of hours. On the other hand, he lacks agility and is very easily overcome by any two people working in concert. Part 3 opens with the revelation that despite everything that just happened, he did very much survive. He crawls away from his shack, goes to a convenience store, ganks the owners, takes a new set of clothes. You know how it goes. His are a little messy after all the murder. As all of this is happening, there is a reporter on TV describing the events of the previous evening, reporting that 8 bodies were found, meaning Paul did die, even though it's not explained how or when, and then also that the reports of cannibalism and violation are unconfirmed. This one changes up the formula a little bit. This time it's 8 friends going to a lake house for the weekend. We have Chris, who is a girl Chris, Vera, Andy, Debbie, Shelley, who's a guy Shelley, Chuck, and Chili. And as you can imagine, yes, they smoke oh so much marijuana. You may be saying, Aiden, you can't count. That's only 7 people. You'd be correct. I'm terrible at math. But Rick was already at the house. He and Chris have a little something going on. Another change is that the first victims are not the kids or a police officer or something like that. In this case, Shelley, while they're in town picking up some stuff, pisses off a biker gang. The biker gang follows them back to Chris's lake house, and they siphon gas out of their van into some gas cans so they can burn down the barn. The first one, Fox, goes into the barn to, have a look around and pour out her gas, but she farts around a little bit too much and then doesn't come out. The next one, Loco, goes in looking for her, and he too gets got. Finally, Ali follows in his 2 friends, and he is ambiguously unconscious. It's unclear if he's dead. That night, we get more lore. Turns out, Chris was attacked by a deformed man in the forest 2 years prior, and this is why she hasn't been coming back to Crystal Lake for the past couple summers. She was upset with her parents, so she ran away to scare them and, just make them upset. And while she was out there, she was chased and caught, and she blacked out even, and she doesn't know what happened, but when she woke up, she was in her own bed. She'd only come back to Crystal Lake because she wanted to confront her fears. And of course, we learn all of this because yet again, everybody has split off. In this case, Chris and Rick went off for a walk, while Shelley and Vera, who are supposed to be kind of on a blind date. Now, if my friends set me up on a blind date where it was a weekend getaway at somebody's lake house, if one of my friends put me in this situation, I would not think they were my friends. Anyway, Shelley and Vera have a not-so-great chat about feelings. Vera steps outside for some fresh air, and Shelley pokes at the fire. Upstairs, Andy and Debbie get into bed, more so hammock, really, so that they can find the true meaning of unity. This is something of a task, given the hammock is a hammock. Chris elaborates on her story to Rick, telling him everything I told you. I just kind of skipped ahead a little bit there. And all the while, she looks remarkably like a young Natalie Portman. As it turns out, her parents act like the whole thing never happened. At the lake house, Jason is still stalking out in the barn. Shelly and Vera get into an argument. Shelly goes down to the barn to, get away from everything. Vera, meanwhile, stays by the water. And then, thinking that Shelly has come back to apologize or something, Vera turns around and gets a very close look at a crossbow bolt, which is unfortunate because I was really starting to like her. The next casualty is Andy, who finds out the alternate ending to the story of Solomon and that baby. For those unfamiliar with the Abrahamic tradition and the story of Solomon, there was a time where a woman brought forward a baby, well, two women brought forward a baby, and both of them claimed to be the baby's mother. And they would not agree. Neither would admit to lying, so Solomon suggested they simply cut the baby in half. They could split the baby. Seems fair. One woman said, no, she can take the baby, and Solomon was like, okay, well, that is clearly the baby's actual mother because she did whatever it took for the baby to survive. So that's where that one was coming from. I wrote it, and I don't mean to patronize. I just realized that some people might not be familiar with the story, and I realize explaining the joke doesn't make the joke funny, but I'm hoping that if I continue explaining the joke long enough and overdoing it, perhaps we'll get to that stage where we come back around, and what I'm saying is once again funny. But of course, it's very difficult. That's a line to toe, and often you don't quite get it right, and I feel like we might be getting to that point. But that said, the story does continue. Debbie, of course, is unaware of all of this. These people all have the situational awareness of, like, the dude from Metallica's One video. Anyway, Debbie goes back to hammock and finds that there is a man under the hammock and he has a knife, and he puts the knife somewhere that is not ideal for the conditions of living. Chuck and Chili are downstairs when the power goes out, and Chuck goes off to the cellar to turn it back on. Chili hears a knock at the door and opens it, only to see Shelly, who has a slice across his throat and appears to be bleeding and is clearly dead. The thing is, this entire weekend, Shelly has been playing pranks that involved makeup. Like, an axe in his head, or being stabbed, or something like that. So, Chili doesn't immediately recognize that Shelly is actually dead. Meanwhile, in the cellar, Chuck roasts after Jason throws him into the circuit breaker. Chili finally realizes that Shelly is actually dead and begins running around screaming, but Jason gets her through the kidney with a hot fire poker, which is probably catastrophic. Rick and Chris return to find that there is quite a mess and some burning popcorn, but no people. Nobody's there, and the power's out. Rick goes down to the cellar to look around, but Jason is kind of new to the gym and misunderstands what skull crushers are, which is not to Rick's benefit. Inside, Chris finds bloody towels in the bathtub and runs out to tell Rick that this weekend may not be going as planned. She sees a body on the way and runs inside, only for Rick's body to get tossed through the window. Now it's time for the big chase sequence, in which Chris displays the most intelligence of any protagonist in any one of these films so far, choosing to get into a car and drive away. But the car does run out of gas, and she has to continue on foot. She gets to the barn, but Jason catches up. She manages to knock him out with a shovel, tie a rope around his neck, and roll him out the upstairs window of the barn, which is really not good for your neck unless you're Jason, in which case, well, we'll get there. For the first time, we get a really good look at his face, and it's clear that these deformities he has, these are congenital. And the fact that he wears a mask suggests that maybe he's even self-conscious about it. Anyway, the point of me saying, it's not good for your neck unless you're Jason is that it doesn't kill him, and he manages to get himself down, and he's about to get Chris when Ali, the biker from the beginning, wakes up and attacks him, but gets his hand chopped off, and then he also gets got. Jason doesn't seem happy about the fact that somebody actually threw hands with him, even though the hands didn't last that long. But the point is, he stays there and he practices his butchery for a little while, which gives Chris the opportunity to get out. But Chris doesn't run away. No, Chris realizes that she needs to finish this. So she takes an axe and she buries it in Jason's forehead. And Jason slumps over, falls to the ground, and he's just lifeless. As with the first film, Chris paddles out onto the lake in a canoe and just lays there and falls asleep. And again, like the first movie, she wakes up the next morning only to be pulled into the water by the rotting corpse of, this time, Mrs. Voorhees. She wakes up the next morning and we see her escorted out of the house by the police, and she's clearly just, her mind's broken. She's giggling and crying and giggling and crying and screaming, and it's just... She's not right. The police drive her off in a squad car, and the camera pans, and we see Jason still lying lifeless in the same location. So in my opinion, so far in the series, this was the best movie. It was definitely better than the first two, but it didn't give us as much lore about Jason. He survives hanging, but that's not really super surprising at this point. However, it's interesting that he did let Chris live the first time he encountered her, perhaps because she was unconscious, and we see that his deformities are almost certainly genetic. The final chapter opens on the same scene that Part 3 closed on, with police everywhere, ambulances taking away bodies, and it's clear that the only survivor of this one was Chris. Jason is still, as are all the others, so he is taken to the nearby hospital and brought to the morgue. Naturally, he wakes up and does some neck carpentry on a medical examiner and then an unscheduled surgery on a nurse. But back at Crystal Lake, everything's going swell, and the Jarvis family is going about their day. Tommy Jarvis was in fact played by Corey Feldman, who is well known for being one of the first people to speak out about the rampant sexual abuse by adult male executives in Hollywood against young people. Allegedly. Tommy is a very talented mask designer, and he does some very, Hollywood quality props. He's also displayed as being quite intelligent. Of course, we also need the young adult crew. In this case, you guessed it, Teddy, Jimmy, Paul, Sam, Doug, and Sarah. Again, just recycling names here. As they drive to Crystal Lake, a community which astonishingly has not grasped the situation at hand, they come across a hitchhiker, but do not help the hitchhiker, and just very soon after, the hitchhiker unfortunately meets Jason. When they arrive at their rental house, they meet Trish and Tommy Jarvis, who of course are siblings. And then while hiking to the lake the next day, they come across two local girls, Tina and Terry, who kind of join their little group, and they all hop into the lake and do some skinny dipping together. At least everybody with the exception of Sarah, obviously not Trish and Tommy, they aren't involved in the skinny dipping, but because Tommy's like 10. But yeah, so Sarah, on the other hand, is a little more on the modest side and decides she doesn't want to do that, so Trish and Tommy then actually show up, and when they realize what's going on, Trish averts Tommy's eyes, but Tommy's like, "Oh, can't I look just a little?" which is kind of funny. But Trish does get invited to a party that night. Trish and Tommy's car breaks down on the drive home, and a hunter named Rob just randomly appears out of the forest, and he helps them fix it. And they ask him, what are you hunting? And he says, bear. And Tommy seems very confident that this is simply impossible, though it is not explained why. Of course, Tommy is correct, he's not hunting bear. Rob's questions make his true purpose here clear. His sister, Sandra, died at the hands of Jason Voorhees not that long ago. And now, Jason Voorhees is missing from the morgue. He's put two and two together. Shockingly, nobody else has. So, he's out there to get him. Trish then invites Rob back to their house, where Tommy shows him all of his props and contraptions. They offer to let Rob stay in the house, but he wants to stay out in the woods, so he heads off to make camp. Back at the party, Paul and Tina are flirting, which Sam does not like, because Paul is her boyfriend. Naturally, she does what any young adult would do in this situation and goes off alone into the dark at night to go skinny dipping, and then swims out to a raft and gets yoinked from the deep. Paul finally starts to feel bad about what he's doing, dancing with this girl that is not his girlfriend, and goes outside to find her, sees that she's on the raft out there, strips down to get into the lake, and goes in. But when he arrives at the raft, he realizes that she's dead, goes to swim back to shore, but gets a harpoon through the groin. Live by the sword, die by the sword, I suppose. Rob hears all of this commotion and grabs his machete and runs off after the sounds, but he hears something snap behind him, and when he returns to camp, he sees somebody running off. Goes to look for his rifle and sees that it has been snapped in half and the barrel bent, which is simply horrifying. Terry and Teddy have been flirting, and this is not going well for Terry because Teddy has far more confidence than he should. He's quite bad. He has zero game, no riz. Like his move involves holding a teddy bear and asking if girls want to give teddy bear a kiss. So Terry naturally wants to go home because everybody else is having a good time but her. Thing is, upstairs, her sister and Jimmy are practicing the DeBellin arts. So, that's not going to work. Tina says, just go home without me, I'll catch up later. She barely makes it outside of the door before Jason, using a pitchfork, decides to play pin the twin to the wall, and he is world champion. Mrs. Jarvis, on the other hand, comes home, and of course her house is right next to the rental house that all the kids are in, so I forgot to mention that. My bad. Anyway, she comes home and finds that Trish, Tommy, and the dog, Gordon, are nowhere to be found. But Jason is. Trish and Tommy are actually on their way home, but they arrive to find that their mother is not there, so you can guess what happened. The power has also been cut, so Trish goes to find Rob to get help with the lights. At this point, he fully explains the situation with Sandra being his sister and all of that. Back at the rental house, Jimmy goes downstairs to get a bottle of wine to celebrate his triumph. He's kind of been struggling with his self-esteem all weekend. However, he gets screwed, and then Jason shows him his butcher knife real close. Jason then goes outside, climbs up the house's siding, breaks through the window, and defenestrates Tina. Outside in Rob's tent, Trish is very confused because they found Jason, and he's in the morgue, he's dead, and Rob's like, no, he's not dead. He's not in the morgue, he's out here. And his goal is to put Jason down for good and make sure there's no further tragedies. But of course, this makes Trish realize, hold on, Tommy's at the house. So they turn to go back to their house. At the party, Teddy is high as Senator's socks watching old stag films on a projector. He walks up to the screen and asks one of the women who is, being projected if she wants to give Teddy Bear a kiss, at which point a knife comes from behind the screen and finally puts an end to that horrible pickup line. Of course, as all of this is going on, Sarah and Doug are upstairs taking a shower. Sarah gets out of the shower to go freshen up for bed, and Doug just kind of chills. While Sarah's gone, however, Jason joins Doug in the shower to do some more skull crushers. Sarah, who somehow did not hear the glass shatter, returns to the bathroom to see that Doug is now slumped over the broken shower glass. Then she tries to escape outside, but Jason has wall hacks and gets play of the game with a axe through the door. Rob and Trish check in on Tommy and then head next door to check in on the others, finding a lot of blood but no corpses. Jason cuts the power while they're inside, so Rob heads down to turn the power back on. Trish, however, goes upstairs and she sees Doug's body, at which point she runs downstairs and starts yelling that Jason is in the house. Now, Rob starts to run back upstairs, but his foot gets stuck in a stair that breaks. He pulls it out, and then he's like, no, my knife! So he goes back down to grab his knife, but Jason gets there first, and then Jason starts just wailing on him, and Rob's yelling, like, Trish, run! He's killing me! He's killing me, run! And I'm not joking. These are the actual words he yells in the film. Like, as I'm watching it, I'm like, I almost wonder if he's somehow in on it and he's Jason's partner, because that's how contrived this looks. Trish escapes back to the house and fights Jason off long enough for Tommy to kind of use his makeup artistry skills and mask making skills to make himself look sort of like the newspaper description of what Jason looked like when he drowned, or of what Alice described the drowned Jason to look like. This, much like Ginny's ploy of pretending to be Jason's mother, works long enough for Trish to come and strike him with a machete, but all that really does is knock off his mask, and he looks even worse than the last time, and Trish just does not handle this well at all. But she does manage to distract Jason long enough for Tommy to swing the machete and bury it right into Jason's head. And it's pretty graphic, but he's definitely done. He's not getting back up. He does, however, have kind of like one of those post-death twitches, which freaks Tommy out, and Tommy just starts wailing on him, like with the machete, just like yeet. The next scene is Trish in a hospital where doctors say she's going to need surgery on her shoulder, but it's not urgent, it can wait until she's recovered a little bit, and she's asking about Tommy, and the doctor's like, don't worry about it. The way he responded under the circumstances was perfectly normal. She asks if she can see him, and they say sure, but only for a little bit, and Tommy's let in. He's kind of bald and funny looking, but so he gives Trish a hug, and there's this really sweet moment, and then we get a freeze frame on Tommy's face, and I'm just gonna have Aiden show it to you. Anyway, the clear implication is that he's messed up from this experience. We don't really learn much further about Jason from this installment, just that he was not killed by an axe to the face, and possibly also not by the machete, but the dismemberment definitely did it. This leaves us with the following knowledge on Jason Voorhees during his life in the original series. As I said before, he is huge, he is strong, and seems largely unaffected by injuries that should cripple him, but he also lacks any agility whatsoever, and if anyone actually tries to challenge him with any degree of planning, they succeed. He seems to be motivated primarily by revenge and an intense sense of territorialism, as well as just the general idea that, like, this is where his mother died and he won't let anyone desecrate it. It's unclear if he always was going to be a murderous, violent psychopath, but the death of his mother definitely pushed him over the edge. He can plan out his attacks and he makes use of stealth. He also doesn't take trophies. He seems to know when not to attack and when to avoid groups, but overall he seems to lack higher reasoning capabilities. He survived drowning, severe bodily trauma, severe head trauma, and only died when a machete was buried in his brain. And then finally there's those deformities which the film suggests are congenital. So what is he? He has a human mother, which in these movies is never implied to have been involved in any sort of witchcraft or necromancy. And it doesn't even seem like she necessarily is superstitious. So whoever Jason's father was, if it wasn't a human being, must have been something that looked like a human being and functioned like a human being. Which led me to the question, could Jason be one of the Nephilim? Those legendary offspring of angels and human women who were superhuman yet depraved, according to apocryphal Christian scripture. So first off, all sects of Abrahamic religion do not necessarily agree on the interpretation of Genesis 6 that describes these Nephilim. Additionally, much of what is believed about them does not come from Genesis, but from the apocryphal book of Enoch. Some scholars argue that the Nephilim were just the ungodly line of Cain. But if one does take the angle that these are half angel, then you kind of have a very good explanation for his strength, his resilience. And if you look at Enoch, his violence tracks very much with how those Nephilim acted in that story. Although, if we're going with the Enoch account, he's actually significantly less depraved. Jason does have a named father in the books, Elias Voorhees, but there's no information about him. It's just that he's named. So it could be possible that he could be an angel in disguise? Demon, maybe? Possessed? Unfortunately, the mystery is arguably solved simply by a case of shoddy writing. Sequels were not part of the plan when the first movie was produced, and Jason was not even alive, let alone the villain. So to make it work, they could really only take Jason's backstory as far back as that first movie. What's between the time of his drowning and the time of his mother's death, or really his killing spree, is left pretty ambiguous. So what happened was that original creators Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller designed Jason as a mentally disabled young boy who just had a tragic swimming accident. It was effects artist Tom Savini that decided he should be deformed and made that addition to the character. And he did that on set of the first film. The character did not have those deformities during the writing process. So they're really a function of the character as it was created by the makeup artist, not the writers. It was 1993's Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, directed by Adam Marcus, that gave a concrete answer for how Jason became Jason. It's just that concrete answer was that Jason was a Deadite from Sam Raimi's Evil Dead series. Now, this was not revealed until 2017, but according to Marcus, Sam Raimi loved the idea, but because New Line Cinema didn't own the Evil Dead series, they couldn't just outright say that's what Jason was, so the way that they revealed it was simply by including a copy of the Necronomicon Ex Mortis in a shot in Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, and this was to imply that what happened was Pamela Voorhees tried to resurrect her dead son, but he became inhabited by a demon. According to Adam Marcus, this is canon. Now, of course, Friday the 13th came out before Evil Dead and included no such suggestions whatsoever, because again, Jason wasn't even the antagonist. Part 2, however, where Jason is the antagonist and does have a backstory, did come out after Evil Dead, so this is not chronologically impossible. I still don't think it's likely that it was planned this way, but in fact, I'm certain it wasn't planned this way. Clearly, Jason was not originally written to be a Deadite, but by 1993, that's where he had ended up. And from what I understand, Sean Cunningham was like a little tired of how stale the series had become and told Adam Marcus to be creative, and Adam Marcus was a little too creative. But how did Cunningham feel about it? He did produce the film, but Adam Marcus never told New Line Cinema about the idea. So if he didn't tell anybody until 2017, did he tell Cunningham? And if Cunningham had known, would he have okayed it? Would he have said yes? If he did know, he did not keep it when he rebooted the series in 2009. That year's remake, starring Supernatural's Jared Padalecki, holds no such paranormal implications. That one does add that Jason refuses to kill a character who looks like his mother. And he's definitely a lot more intelligent, a lot more agile. He's much scarier in the remake than he was in any of the original movies. But it still doesn't explain how he survived alone out there all those years when he was a child. It is, by the way, in my opinion, the best Friday the 13th movie, just simply in every way, it is the best film in the series. It scores the highest in every category. And in my opinion, once you watch it and you experience it as a horror movie with the current sensibilities for horror movies, obviously today we're used to much scarier stuff than what was coming out in the 80s. But it gives you a better appreciation. It makes it easier to enjoy the older ones because you no longer feel like the story is being ruined by poor filmmaking. So obviously we put a pretty bombastic title on here. We asked a pretty silly question, but it was a legitimate question that we asked when we went into researching, was based on, neither of us knew a ton about Jason Voorhees or Friday the 13th, so we were like, maybe we can ask that question. Clearly, Jason Voorhees is a man with a backstory that doesn't make sense because it was the 80s and somebody was trying to profit off of the success of Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street and all of that, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's still a good, solid, fun film, especially for the Halloween time. It's pretty gory. I wouldn't watch it with kids for a number of reasons. But as far as, you and your friends are going to have a few drinks on Halloween and you need to watch a movie, this is a good one. It's fun. It's got enough backstory. I'm going to go back and watch the rest of the series just because I'm curious now. And it's made me have an appreciation for some of these older horror movies. So I think we're going to do more videos like this if this one does well. So if you liked that we covered a horror movie and how we covered a horror movie, let us know. If you would like to hear from Aiden about the filmmaking side of things, we can absolutely include that in these videos. If you think that we should dial back the level of meta-analysis during the story and save it for the end, we can do that. But, we just would like to know what you liked about this video and what your constructive criticism would be, because it is kind of a new format for us. And with all of that said, if you want to support what we're doing here, you can check us out on Patreon at the Lore Lodge. You can also subscribe to a membership here on YouTube. It doesn't get you as many treats as Patreon, but it is a little easier. You can catch us talking about these topics live on Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can also catch those in audio format every Tuesday after the show on Spotify, where they live forever after. We have merch, we have coffee, those links are in the description. They're both delicious. We also have other channels. We're trying to put content on them. They're the History Hut, the Weird Bible, the Lore Lounge, and my personal one where I stream stuff, games, analysis, reaction, whatever, with my buddies. It's a good time. It's just a good, chill, general hangout spot. If that's the kind of thing you're into, go check it out. If not, I hold nothing against you. I understand that's not everybody's cup of tea. We also have a Discord, which you can join at bit.ly/jointhelodge. We'd also like to again thank Factor for partnering with our channel. If you want to give it a shot, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code LoreLodge50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. And with that said, I'm Aiden Mattis, and thank you for stopping by the Lore Lodge.